Welcome back to Popular Urbanum Chats, a series where we chat to other reenactors about reenacting. This episode, I caught up with Leah and Nadeem and discussed some of the issues that we felt were important to them as reenactors. Due to some recording hitches, we lost the very beginning of the audio of this interview, so we'll be jumping right in and talking to Leah. We spoke to Nadeem in our last episode of the series, so if you want to know more about him and his projects, follow the link in the description. Now, on to the episode. Today we're joined again by Nadeem, and we've got Leah here. We're going to be looking at experiences that we all face in the reenactment community. So last time we had a bit of a chat with Nadeem. Nadeem and I talked about where we came from as reenactors. Leah, if you could just talk about how you started in reenactment and where you are now.
Hi, thank you for having me, Andrew. And my name's Leah. I'm a living historian and a reenactor, I guess, if you make a distinction between the two. I'm based in York, UK, which is actually where I grew up. I'm of Irish extraction, but I grew up here, as you can tell by my Yorkshire accent. I am a reenactor here in York. I predominantly focus on the Viking Age or the early medieval period here in York, although I do also look at what's going on in Scandinavia at the same time. I'm also very interested in Eastern Europe at that time, but yes, York and kind of an Anglo-Danish type of impression is what I'm interested in most. I'm also a historical dressmaker, and I have just started a blog of my own, which maybe someday, maybe I might make some YouTube videos to accompany my blog, the Eoforwic project. And yes, I do Viking Age stuff. I am part of a group here that my husband and I and a friend set up 6 years ago. I think next month when Eoforwic Festival, when Eoforwic Festival should be on here in York, which is my local market or event, if you like. It should be 6 years. Is that right, Eric? Yeah, 6 years that I have been reenacting and helping to run the group here. I think that's about it. I'm very, in particular, I focus on domestic history and kind of doing the living history things in camp. I'm not a combatant. I tried it and I wasn't very good at it. So cooking, dyeing, sewing, textiles, that's my kind of thing.
No, that's great. I'll make sure I include a link to your blog. Always interested.
There's not much on there, but thank you.
No, I mean, that's always more textile nerds. Always great to have more people with an eye to the creation of, or recreation, should I say, of historical fashion, since, as you know, that is a passion of ours. Okay, so recreation of the early medieval Norse cultures. That's a bit of a fraught topic as of the recording, which is early January here. This will probably be going out in February, but bit of a fraught topic right now. So that in itself has a whole lot of challenges, I guess.
Yes, unfortunately so. It does carry some baggage. Obviously, we're not alone in this. Some periods definitely have it worse than others. Certain areas or backgrounds certainly have it worse than others in terms of carrying a certain baggage when it comes to every facet of the hobby. That includes kind of what's appropriate to actually do in a public setting, and when I say appropriate, I know some people are going to scoff at that, but either way, I think you're on the wrong channel and on the wrong kind of video if you're going to scoff at that kind of thing. When I mean appropriate in terms of not just what Johnny Public is going to like and he's going to expect, but what is kind of what is appropriate by appropriate, but what is going to not upset people. And again, that's something that some people would scoff at. There are ways to discuss uncomfortable topics. There are ways to look at history kind of as a product of its time. ways that are, that's what I would say by appropriate. There are ways of looking at these things which do not condone certain things, but still present them in a truthful way. And I think that is really important I think that actually gets lost a lot of the time in reenactment. You can have a balance between not upsetting people and not making people feel very uncomfortable, but also being truthful. And for example, things like in the Viking Age, slavery was absolutely rampant. It formed a massive part of the most countries' economy, and many people made full living from it. But we can discuss that and present that not just to the public, but amongst ourselves as reenactors, as historians, as history enthusiasts, without necessarily condoning that. And I think most people nowadays would, quite rightly would, look at slavery, something like that, and would say, well, that's pretty distasteful, to put it, to be British about it. That's pretty distasteful. But it doesn't mean if we are presenting something like that, a scenario that might include, for example, I don't know, slave collars from Dublin, in which they found quite a few, discussions in sagas or in kind of Christian accounts, discussing slavery. You can present that kind of thing and talk to people about it, whilst also not saying, haha, we're going to, in arguably quite, bad taste, we're going to dress up as Vikings and we're going to run among the crowd and grab women around the waist and grab children and say, haha, I'm going to take you as a slave. There are ways of balancing it, still making it interesting, still being true to history, whilst not being
it's about understanding history, and saying, well, this is a thing that happened, but not necessarily celebrating it, and that's the difference, right? Say, for example, one of the issues that I talk about is understanding history but not fetishizing history, or ignoring history. So one of the things that is ignored, particularly about the late medieval period, is that medieval slavery still, in the late medieval period, slavery was still quite rampant, and the processes of who could be a slave was anyone not a Christian, so any heretic, essentially. So slaves from the Barbary coast and the Slavic countries, anyone, from, well, essentially the Slavic countries that weren't Christianized were fair game, and they made up large numbers of the Mediterranean households, and as domestic servants, and that's where late medieval and early modern people got the idea for the transatlantic slave trade, because they were already in the process of using East Africa as their basis of getting domestic servants. They went, well, we're already using this place. Well, why don't we continue to do it? And it didn't just. I always use this term of, it didn't appear fully formed. They didn't just appear out of nowhere. They already knew how to do this. And so understanding how these things happened, we can understand the processes, and then we can, but people have this rose tinted glasses of the medieval period, and I think that's it's nonsense. We can't do that. And absolutely, it wasn't chattel slavery. So a lot of people will challenge me and say, oh, well, it wasn't chattel slavery, and chattel slavery has to be condemned. It's the most disgusting thing, but it's still slavery. It's still slavery. It has to be condemned. Just because people could earn their freedom. Oh, thanks. I've earned my freedom. It's still slavery. It's still abhorrent.
I've heard the same thing. I've actually genuinely seen people, of course, on social media. People really sometimes do not show their best side. They really show their butts on social media, sometimes literally. And yeah, I've literally seen people on discussions regarding, they end up getting derailed on historical discussion groups discussing Viking Age slavery. And I have actually seen people make the argument of, oh, well, here's some accounts from, for example, either a saga or from Anglo-Saxon England. There's some kind of historical account, and they're discussing this particular person and their will, and that they released some people after they died. And so really it couldn't be that bad. And oh, well, that there were laws in Anglo-Saxon England regarding, how the fact that you have to provide food and, adequate clothing and stuff like that for your slaves. And oh, well, people say that it's bad, but I mean, it could be a lot worse. It could be worse. At least they had laws making sure that they couldn't be killed for no reason, or if they were, then they had to pay a certain amount of weregeld for it. And I'm thinking, are you seriously, like, it's really, the discussion has derailed that badly that you are actually trying to almost justify.
Well, I mean,
like you say, it's funny, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just apologia.
Yes.
But
you gotta wonder why that's the hill you would choose to die on, really. But
yeah, and I guess that because the issue is that because they've chosen to fetishize or glorify a people, that they don't want to see a fault in their glorified historical people. People don't want to see that their heroes or the people that they see as the great people that they want to emulate as being bad, essentially. So they have to enter into apologia and argue as to why the things that were fundamentally bad were not so bad.
Yeah, I think that you did. I think you do the right thing by using the term fetishization, actually, especially for the period that I am interested in. Yes, I would definitely use the word fetishization, because it does. Using that term implies a certain level of maybe this is just me reading into it, but I find the term fetishization to be quite good for what goes on sometimes with people wanting to reenact the Viking or be involved in the Viking Age scene, because I think fetishization kind of implies there is a level of objectifying and not really being I don't know, there is a word for this, I just can't think of it off the top of my head, that they're not really interested in the fact of something. They fetishize their idea of the Viking Age. So really they're not all that interested in the true facts of the matter, or not necessarily always. They're not interested in the actual fact. Yes, that's the word. Yeah, cherry picking.
Vikings were tough fighting men. They were all pirates that went around raiding, and they lived by the will of the sword. This kind of nonsense, this primitive nonsense. I mean, and it's the same thing with knights. They were strong fighting men with a sense of honor that protected their lands and lived by Christ. Like, no, they were thugs. They were literally robber barons. Yeah. Knights were not good guys. Knights were the bad guys. Everyone hated them. Their church hated them. The peasantry hated them. The merchants hated them. Yeah, everyone hated them. They went around robbing each other. They were bad guys. Like, they're not good guys.
But they don't want to have people. Usually, that small subset of people don't want to have that conversation.
No, absolutely not. I mean, and look, I guess that brings us onto a topic that another topic that I want to talk about, which it's a good segue. Is the fighting, is the dominance of reenactment and fighting. The reenactment is fighting. I guess that's the origins of reenactment was, military reenactment. Is reenactment just fighting?
Well, I mean, I think you know the answer I'm going to give. No, nowadays it is not. I think it, as you say, a lot of the reenactment world is made up of, regardless of period, but some more than others, that is made up of a lot of these big societies. Some of them are like national, international societies, and a lot of those had their beginnings, yes, as and I don't mean this in a bad way. They started as essentially local fight clubs for, beer and bash is a term that gets used quite a lot in the UK. Usually it's a bit derogatory nowadays, but they started off as good family fun. I know for a fact the society that my group is part of did originally start out as this is what I've been told. I hope again no one's going to come in the comments from my society and tell me off. I wasn't alive in the 70s when it was founded, so I have to go off the stories I've been told. It was originally actually lots of bikers. Lots of bikers who, a lot of them were quite into early medieval history, or at least their view of it. Some quite high profile things like the Coppergate digs here in York, actually, that happened towards the late 70s, early 80s, that they did big excavations here in the UK, and it was very well publicised. In mainstream media, and that also got a lot of people who were very interested, people who weren't, they weren't archaeologists. Well, many of them weren't archaeologists. They weren't formal historians. A lot of them were regular, normal, people of all sorts of different backgrounds, but otherwise, unacademic people. And it was the first time, really, that these people kind of got together. They did, their idea of based on what information that they had available to them, and they got together and they did what is fun, which is to make weapons and to bash each other, and do it in a field, do it in someone's back garden. And at least from what I've heard, that happened. There were lots of these kind of small groups, and a lot of them, you get bored of hitting your friends and you think, right, well, it would be more fun. There's 10 of us here, but it would be way more fun if we could meet up with the people in the next town over who is, a mate of a mate. And him and his friends, they also are doing what we're doing. And maybe we can do kind of 10v10. It would be way more fun to do it that way and to fight some different people. And if you do that enough, eventually it evolves and it turns into something bigger and something, something beautiful, actually, because it really starts to grow. And from what I've been told, they really started to become proper societies when these people, their partners, many of whom were female, they were done with, they wanted to get involved as well. And, it started from them, kind of going presumably to the shed or to the end of the garden and saying, do you want any more cups of tea? It started from them doing that, and then devolved into, actually, I'd quite like to have a go. Actually, I'm done sewing your clothing. What did Lady Vikings wear? I would quite like to do this as well. And, the kids would like to do it. And the more people did that, suddenly they're no longer doing it in their garden or the local green. They're doing it, a bigger field outside of town, and other people are coming from different towns, meaning, the whole family comes along. But yes, so it did have its beginnings, at least my period and my background as a reenactor in the UK. Yes, I as far as I know, the same thing happened kind of over, across the pond, across the various ponds. Especially I think a lot of it was English-speaking countries, at least for my period, that became really popular. And then, people went over and discovered that people in Europe were doing the same thing, and they realised it's more fun if you do it together. And so, yes, it did have military origins. I think it comes from, it comes from those original bikers, if it be bikers or those, people who just want to, blow off some steam on a weekend, and then their partners getting involved. But nowadays, no, absolutely, it is not all about military reenactment or combat. I do know that is from my personal experience of being part of a group, part of a larger society. In fact, I'm part of a society here in the UK, the Vikings UK, and I'm also part of Jomsborg, which is another society you might have heard of, and that one is kind of international. And in both of those societies, my experience has been from talking to others that whether they do combat still or not, it was the combat that got them in there. It was when they say that they're going to an event, we might say, I'll say, oh, I'm going to a market in Ribe, or I'm going to, I don't know, the reenactment at Hastings. But a lot of people, when the members of the public are coming along, who are those people who are going to be your potential base of new recruits or members, they will say, we're going to the battle reenactment. And, it's kind of everyone else who's off sewing and, making pottage and actually doing a lot of things which probably would not be done on a battle site, but they're very interesting to watch. They're all kind of an afterthought for a lot of the members of the public. And since, like, as I say, the members of the public who are attending are most likely to be your future members, then yes, I think it makes a lot of sense that lots of people get into the hobby just to do the combat, really, and they kind of discover the joy of literally everything else that you can do that isn't combat. Only when they actually kind of dip their not so much dip their toe in, dip their whole foot in, I think, is when they actually start to realise that.
Yeah. Now, Nadeem, I know you've got some views on this.
Some
one.
views in combat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was really interesting from Leah, especially talking about how different people sort of got into reenactment, because it sounds like it started off as a combat-based thing, which then kind of developed the historical side. And like for me, I mean, it's doing the combat as it is done in modern UK reenactment, and that was something that's particularly interested me, because it doesn't really have much educational benefit from my point of view, because it's safety fighting, where it's sort of tapping shoulders and thighs very lightly, and that's not something that would be done ever. And the other thing is from my point of view, if you're going to do combat, then I don't see the point in doing it with steel weapons if you're going to do that, because the risk of injury is so high for, in my opinion, so little benefit. From my point of view, I'd probably be much happier myself doing sort of SCA or LARP style combat with foam or whatever, just because you can take more riskier strikes without risking severe injury. But in terms of combat, like generally, it's fun to watch. I gotta be honest with you. It is more enjoyable to watch combat than sort of watch other crafts. Although I do like talking to the craftspeople more than I like talking to the combatants. I especially love watching bad combat, because it's just hilarious in a lot of times. But no, I definitely agree that combat is first off, it's probably the main pull for getting people into reenactment in the first place, because it's just got that more sort of spectacular, more impressive image around it. And I think, like we said, a lot of people get into reenactment from combat, and then they develop the historical stuff on the side. I'm not really sure if that's going to change or how that's going to change, other than, say, in small niche projects. Yeah. We definitely should be putting more of a focus on, every other part of society, because if you go to a reenactment and all you see is warriors, then you'll come up with this skewed view of the past that everybody would just be fighting all the time and society was just knights and stuff. And, that's clearly not true. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to provide an alternate view there, because I think it's good. I think that combat should be more accurate. I believe that having engaged in combat for longer than a lot of people I know have been alive, is that combat should be less choreographed.
Yeah.
It should be with lighter weapons, and people should be fighting in more period armor, because with more accurate techniques, because less injuries will happen, and that's why I practice HEMA, because it's actually safer. Choreographed fighting is I'm going to upset people here, but hey, why not? Is not safe. It's not safe fighting. But I understand that people have an idea that show, quote unquote, show fighting or choreographed fighting looks better for the audience. If it's more accurate, it's a lot safer. It's actually more spectacular. It's better. There's my stance. But hey, some people don't want to do that, and that's okay. I'm not here to be the boss of how people reenact. If I was, Anyway, everyone would be doing 14th century militia. But that said, I absolutely agree that if everyone was knights, if everyone was like combat, it does give a skewed perception. Also, the past isn't just aristocracy or like the military elite, that there is not just craftspeople. Yeah, well, there's craftspeople, there's ordinary people. And I think that's something that does chase off a lot of people from wanting to get into reenactment when large swaths of reenactment is just burly men with scraggly beards, he says, as he has a unkempt beard. But you know, like one of my experiences is that when I did have to drop out of like full-time combat, no one knew what to do with me. You know, my group, which was a combat group, didn't know what to do with me. So what could I do? You know, it's an entirely combat oriented group. All they do is fight. You know, that's how they were set up, as, you know, they were just knights doing knightly tournament, and so what could I do? You know, so so many groups are just created for combat. You know, they're Roman legionaries, or they're Napoleonic soldiers, or, you know, they're World War II GI infantry, or, you know, how many reenactment groups, if you start naming them and what they reenact, are warriors, are soldiers.
A significant majority, I reckon. There's a few that I've come across, mainly on Instagram, because Instagram as a platform tends to be more women oriented. I found that are mainly focusing on fashion and textiles and stuff. But certainly, you know, they're in the minority in the grand scheme of things, in my experience.
Yeah,
I would agree with that. I actually, when it comes to, this sounds so snobby, but when it comes to quality reenactment and the type of reenactment that I'm interested in, which would be pretty much actually any other type of history other than military. You know, I have big respect for well done military reenactment and impressions, but it's just not something that it really not the type of thing that I'm interested in. But pretty much anything else, so not just domestic reenactment, but things like actually travel. There's quite a few people I follow on Instagram, most of them female, but not all, who, yes, the focus of their I'm going to say early medieval, because some of them do Eastern European reenactment, but specifically the type of kind of traveling and trading type of aspect of it. And yeah, I would consider some of those accounts that I would follow. I mean, it has to be compact because of there's only so much space, you know, on Instagram to be able to write your caption and photos and whatnot. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it is.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I do enjoy doing. I mean, I haven't done it in a long time because my stuff is very incomplete. But I think the fact that I do it so infrequent, do military stuff so infrequently, just makes it kind of feel cooler when I do. Because I'll maybe armor up once or twice a year, and I won't do any combat in it because I don't want to do combat. But and the thing is, all of my stuff is sharp. So if I do combat, people, you know, will lose hands and die and things, which is not cool. But I do enjoy doing the sort of the presentations of it, even if there's no combat involved. I prefer it probably more than the civilian stuff, but it takes a lot more effort to do, and obviously it's more expensive.
Yeah, it is. It's a money hole. Yep. It's a money pit. I think though, in my experience, is that when a group is just, I mean, this is anecdotal, okay, and you know, everyone gets a little bit upset when you talk about anecdotal evidence, is that when a group starts having, you know, when it's all just lads, you know, it's lads, just the lads, and they're all the fighters. It's if you want to think about inclusion, right? Like who's going to want to start showing up to this group, and if someone who's not one of the lads shows up, it's going to be someone who's fairly brave. Yeah. You know, fairly brave. And you see a whole bunch of like burly bearded dudes all joking and being a boys club, to show up and stick their head in and go, oh yeah, I'll swing a sword, or I'll want to sit down and sew a coat where all these burly lads are all joking around and talking about beer and, you know, cars or whatever it is. Yeah. But once there is someone there that isn't one of the lads, or two or three people who aren't the lads, you know, maybe it's a couple of, you know, their girlfriends or whatever else, then the group starts changing. And then you'll get some different faces. You know, if you've got a couple of kids hanging around, it becomes the vibe, you know. I call it the vibe. The vibe of the group changes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And I think that's I think that kind of segues into another part of a topic that we're talking about, like a bit of inclusion, if we'd like to talk about that.
Yeah, inclusion again is another one of those words that I know some people within my own community, generally people who, you know, in terms of how to make people feel welcome and included, usually the type of people who would roll their eyes at this would be the type of people who would have very opposite view and conflicting views with mine on this. Yes, inclusion is something that I think is a bit of an afterthought for some groups and some scenes more than others. I think some of my friends who do different periods have said that, like ones that are a bit kind of smaller, because Viking Age is, at least as far as I know, I think Viking Age reenactment is the most popular, at least in England. Like, well, the UK, I think, just generally, I think that Viking Age is the most popular. But my friends who have done other periods that maybe are a slightly more niche have said that inclusion is less of an issue because there are just, for them, because there are just so many, so fewer people involved that you kind of have to, kind of learn to get along. Also, they tend to have fewer events to be able to attend, which means that more of their events can be tailored to the needs of the individuals within that group, within that smaller group. So, I suppose the best way of discussing inclusion is how I feel as somebody within my scene, how we could tackle certain issues and make people feel more welcome, make people feel more comfortable getting involved, and not just getting people involved, but having people who are already involved feel more comfortable and be willing to stay, because that's something that people don't think of. There is a certain amount of, I've heard discussion regarding, usually it tends to be women, the discussion of women and the discussion of people of different ethnic backgrounds, which in the Viking Age, you know, it tends to be discussed, some, especially with recent discourse in the past few years in society as a whole, there has been some concern on some people's behalf that, you know, almost kind of, oh, should we be doing more? And what can we do? Should we be concerned that most of, 98% of our society, 99% of our society are white, not necessarily British, but they are, that they are white passing or Caucasian. Should we be concerned about that? In which case, should we be reaching out? How do we do that? And, those are questions that I'm in no position to answer, but the same type of discussions tend to go on about that as with women, that how do we get them involved, but they don't ask the questions of how do we get them to stay, because I feel like that way of framing it, while it's often got good intentions, that i.e. How do we reach out to them, how do we entice them to come, I feel like that in some ways kind of shirks a bit of the blame onto the people who you're hoping to get involved by saying, well, people of color, just don't respond well. We have the advertisements and they just don't seem to want to join, and that kind of puts it on them. Or saying, well, we do have plenty of women in our society, and if more women, or especially younger women, if they don't want to join, then I mean, we've tried everything we can, and that kind of shoves it onto the women, where meanwhile, or to the people of color, or any kind of background, rather than saying, what is it that we're doing that might be, people maybe are coming along to our training sessions, they are maybe coming along to events, but they're feeling a little bit alienated or not particularly supported. And at least in my experience of helping to kind of run a group, we're quite young. The group has only been around for 6 years. Or it will be 6 years next month, probably around now when people are listening to it now. 6 years, that's quite young compared to some of the other groups who are nearby to us. Some of them have got 15, 20 years that they've been reenacting. And so we, not only are we young in terms of the group itself, but a lot of our membership base tends to be fairly young. That I think we worked it out that it's about 50-50 at the moment, students versus people who are in the workplace. And our average kind of age group tends to be between 18 and 35. I think a lot of people in the hobby, regardless of period, are in that age bracket, but it tends to be, it's unusual that most of a given group will belong to that. Certainly the people who are in the membership, so in the leadership positions, will not tend to be in that bracket. It will be people who are kind of middle-aged or potentially even older. A lot of people who are around our neck of the woods, who are leading groups, they are kind of my parents' age. And so, at risk of sounding bad, we, as younger people, we tend to be more kind of socially aware of things like political correctness and things that, at the very least, the way that we speak and the way that we promote ourselves, the kind of behaviour that we expect of our group members, may be a little bit more politically correct than some of the other groups that we, in the society that we're in. And in other societies that happen to be in the area. Political correctness is a bit of a dirty word for some people, but I think as a very very first, a very very first step in terms of promoting a more inclusive atmosphere. Call me. I was going to say call me old-fashioned, but actually call me newfangled. But I do think. That like pretty much any, figure it like a workplace or like an educational institution. Yes, as a very very minor small thing, we should maybe just consider how we talk to others. I have heard, that you were mentioning earlier, kind of sat around a fire and it's kind of the lads. And I have an absolutely filthy sense of humour, very dark sense of humour, but there is a line that's drawn, and I think people of all backgrounds, and I'm not pointing the finger at just the lads. There will be a fire surrounded with the lads in inverted commas, but there will be women amongst that group who are considered part of the lads. And I think, at least I don't know about where the scene near you, Andrew, but at least in the UK, as I mentioned earlier, there is this kind of usually derogatory sense. Some people will dismiss a group as being, they're very beer and bash, on very laddish. Sometimes they will have absolutely fantastic group cohesion amongst themselves. They will be really great at showing up for every event. They will have, potentially they might even have really nice kit, really good impressions, and they're very good with talking to the public. But around that fire, it can be maybe the wording that they would use is putting people off. And again, people will roll their eyes. Some people will roll their eyes at that. And I'm not suggesting that no one can ever make a joke, but I have, plenty of times heard people women even making jokes around the fire, people who are clearly very comfortable amongst their friends, as they should be, and getting a little bit over comfortable and, saying some stuff that really is a bit distasteful.
Well, I mean, and that's because sorry to interrupt, but that's because they feel it's a safe space for them, right?
Yes, but it should be a safe space for everyone.
Well, that's
some
exactly
of that language is, if I'm not going to use a slur, but I, for example, have heard, as you were saying, that it should be that it feels a safe space for them. if someone comes along and is part of that group and outwardly seems to have been kind of accepted or is on their way to being accepted by that group, people might not think much if they've never had somebody in the group before who is, for example, gay. They might have never had a guy in the group who is gay, and they will, completely not meaning anything by it, make a joke or drop a slur, which they think that it's just amongst mates, and no one has ever kind of made has ever made a remark on them using that term before. But then, as we were before we started recording, that you mentioned when discussing this, that a lot of this is when somebody brings something up that maybe they're not feeling particularly comfortable. Most of the problems come in that interaction, but if the person who said the uncomfortable thing or the problematic thing, they feel like it is an attack on them rather than perhaps, put it this way, a reproach on, can you please meet me halfway, make me more comfortable. Instead, they see that as an attack on them, as trying to control them, and but I want to say what I would like to say, and I feel like you're making me out to be a bad person, and I believe I'm a good person, and so I don't like you saying that.
That's right.
And I think a lot of the problems with inclusion in reenactment come from, just in my experience, exactly that anytime people say, that they do stick their head above the parapet and they would say, and this is women, this is gay people, trans people, this is people of different ethnic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds. Anytime anyone kind of raises their head above the parapet and says, look, totally love you guys, but please can you not use that word or can you not make that kind of jokes around me, because I just think they're not really very funny and it's making me feel a bit like I don't want to be here. And immediately you get this knee-jerk reaction of kind of, well, we think that we're good people, we've always had a good time, and we're just joking around, we aren't offended by this joke, and so I don't like that you're being offended by it.
They don't want to be policed, and the issue is there are certain spaces, right? There are certain spaces where culturally that behavior is not okay. Like, you wouldn't go into a kid's school and use that kind of language or that kind of behavior. Socially, everyone said, don't go into a child's school and use slurs. And if someone did, everyone would be outraged. It would just be, there would be outrage. People were like, I can't believe you went into a church and started throwing around slurs. Okay. And while there may be some people who are edgelords and they think it's funny or cool, nominally society's gone, we don't use slurs in churches or children's schools or Parliament. Australia is different because they're horrible, but like nominally there's spaces where it's not okay to use slurs or swear, or we know this, but there are certain spaces that people have decided that it's okay, that it's safe for them to use these words still. And the reenactment scene, they've decided, because no one's pulled them up on it, and those people are resenting that space being made uncomfortable for them. That it's not to say you are unwelcome there. Don't do that, because we also want to occupy that space.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, actually, that yes, that's the problem, is that when it comes to, for example, women maybe a group wanting more women to join, I think you hit the nail on the head there, that it doesn't mean they're not welcome, but sometimes people don't quite understand that it's like, well, you have to meet people, the world is made up of lots and lots of different types of people, and sometimes kind of you might have to make a slight shift or adjustment, you as a group of people. If you are, you might be saying, you might mean it in your heart when you say, oh, but we love women, we're not sexist, we really like women, and we're not, kind of, we love women, we're not misogynists, we're not chauvinists, we really do we want women in the group, and we'd love to have a couple of shield maidens in the ranks, and we're not just okay with women, but like only wanting them to be in the living history encampment, but not cooking and walking around barefoot with the children. They really will believe that and they do believe, they mean it when they're saying, well, we aren't like that. We're happy for them to take on male roles if they want, traditionally male roles in the Viking Age. We're fine with them doing that. We'd love that. We just don't understand why they don't stick around, or why when they do come along, they act like a colossal, what, and they're all uppity. I don't understand why they're being like that, because we are welcoming. And then I think me included, all of us, I think, could stand to, if one is in that situation and wondering why it is that people of a certain kind of background or whatever aren't willing to, or just don't seem to be taking the bait. We should look at ourselves first and be thinking like, right, well, it's not enough to just tell people, actions rather than words. It's not enough to just tell people we welcome everyone of every background. You need to be kind of a bit more proactive.
Yeah,
in your actions regarding if someone does say something or does something. You really need to be proving to the person who is feeling uncomfortable and like they don't want to come back. You need to be proving to them that it's like, look, we meant it when we said this is a safe place for you. It's a safe place for all of us. We're a bunch of mates. You need to treat them like a mate rather than being like, oh, well, they're entitled to say what they want to say, and I'm sorry if it offends you, and makes you feel like you don't want to come back, but I'm not going to tell them what they can and can't say, or I'm not going to tell them what they can and can't do, especially if you're in a leadership position. That's unfortunately, you sometimes have to be, you have to make difficult decisions and put your foot down, even if it makes everything uncomfortable.
You have to lead. You can't tell one person, oh yeah, mate, just keep on doing what you're doing because you're my mate, but then harm other people or let other people implicitly or explicitly be harmed by their actions because they're your mate and you've known them for 5 years or 10 years. Nadeem,
have a lot of that.
Yeah, sorry,
go on.
No, I was just gonna say, Nadeem, have you got anything to add?
Not well, maybe. I think Leah covered pretty much. Well, you two covered pretty much everything I would have said, actually. So I mean, the only other thing I'd add is that we can talk about inclusion within groups, which is which Leah's covered very well. And then there's inclusion within the scene as a whole, which is, I guess, mainly relevant to sort of independent reenactors looking for stuff to do, or small niche groups looking for stuff to do, which is probably a bit harder to sort of coordinate, because at least in a with when we're trying to include a new member into an existing group, there's some sort of hierarchy and structure and leadership where inclusion can be enforced and maintained. But trying to get a new person or a new project or something included in the reenactment scene as a whole is probably much harder, because we don't have that same structure to sort of facilitate this. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I guess the onus would be on event organizers to make sure everything's inclusive, but then event organizers are probably more interested in getting the public in, as opposed to making sure making sure everything's inclusive. I guess their interests, I don't know, I can't speak for this because I'm not an event organizer, but I guess their interests are probably primarily with the public and secondarily with the reenactors. I don't know, what do you think?
I'm going to say the same as you, that a lot of it's down to something that we as reenactors can't control, which is the event organizers, and the fact that whether we like it or not, what we do is 1,000,000% commercialized. We are the product, and they don't really, a lot of event organizers might mean it when they might genuinely mean it when they say, oh well, we do care about authenticity, we do care about accuracy, and we care about safety and inclusivity, but they mean it when but they don't really know what goes into it, and how much is reliant on the reenactors. And so I think until we, unfortunately, I do say unfortunately, the hobby that we're doing, so much of it, at least especially Viking Age stuff, and especially my experience within the UK is that so much of it is commercialized, but it's like kind of what would you call it, a mutually beneficial thing where the reenactors don't get events if the people don't organize them, but then the event organizers need us to populate the events.
That's a whole entire other topic that
Yeah.
is in my craw,
Yeah.
about this treatment of reenactors by event organizers.
I have some stories.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I should share them here, but I have stories.
Yeah,
we'll talk about them after we stop the call.
Yeah.
But one thing I do want to talk about is perhaps non-European based depictions or groups. You know, obviously reenactment is very Eurocentric, and what European centric reenactors can do to try to champion, without obviously fetishizing non-European cultures, perhaps. I don't know if this can be answered here, but like, what can like European reenactors do to get people of other ethnicities to engage in reenactment of their cultures? And here's another question. That's something that Ocean and I have lots of heated conversations about. Like, obviously we live in colonized countries, and we live in countries where there are indigenous cultures. Obviously the Maori, and in New Zealand and in Australia, we've got there's lots of different indigenous peoples, and they both have living cultures. So they particularly can't reenact. They wouldn't reenact because they've got living cultures. They don't think of their cultures as being reenacted. They live their cultures. But as a Westerner, I recreate a culture that's no longer 14th century Europe. We've had all these different changes, and we argue about that because did Europe actually, European medieval culture, die? Anyway, it's a big argument. Is that something that is it appropriate? It's definitely not appropriate for indigenous peoples with living cultures to reenact their culture. So what can we do to facilitate reenactment of other cultures, or just help living cultures have a space to display their living cultures at our events? Or would they want to? That's another question that we talk about all the time. Because, so that's perhaps not something we can answer here, but a thought for people.
I agree. So that's going to take a lot to unpack. I think the first thing I would probably say is that it might not necessarily come under living history or whatever, and it might come under sort of general sort of cultural events as opposed to specific historical events, such as the events I did, which such as the Persian Cultural Day or the Nowruz events or the Central Asia festivals, which isn't so much about history as it is about a specific region's culture. I wonder if that might be a better fit than specifically historical reenactment. I don't know. I'm just spitballing this out there, but what do you think?
When you were asking the question, actually, I was thinking very much along the same lines as Nadeem, that I mean, it has to be done super carefully and with the utmost of taste, but actually both crafts and authenticity could be the savior here to be able to bring to make this not an issue. That actually it obviously I cannot speak on behalf of kind of any indigenous culture, but the only type of way that I could think of that type of thing being reconciled with reenactment is to view it through a different lens, and perhaps first of all I would take, especially when dealing with any colonized people, formerly colonized or currently colonized peoples, I would take any military facet of it away, and I would focus more on things like heritage crafts, because like I said, it would have to be done extremely carefully, and this is where it's fantastic when reenactors themselves, especially the more knowledgeable people in our communities, it's why I think it's so fantastic when they do actually take it upon themselves and, you know, do grassroots events where they themselves are the organizers. And at risk of, you know, being elitist, I don't really, you know, organize many events. I've organized, you know, a couple of the shows that we've done, but not, you know, they are not in the same kind of sense. But I have massive admiration for a couple of people in my own community with the Viking Age who have taken it upon themselves, and they have been called elitist by some people within the community because they've said, well, we will be enforcing a clothing guide. You know, we've picked a time. You know, some people, it's a specific date if it's for a certain event to commemorate a certain battle, or usually it's a battle, let's be real. Or they will say it's a 50-year span and it's based in this particular place, and we will, you know, we're keeping it small. We'd rather have quality over quantity. Sometimes they're open to the public, sometimes not. But I think people such as that can be instrumental in terms of, and are necessary in this hypothetical scenario with a kind of cultural event. If it was reenactors who were in charge of such a thing, which I think if you're involving crafts, especially if you are doing kind of I can't remember, multi-period / multicultural event. I know for a fact when I was younger, prior to being a reenactor, even now, you know, I would love to attend that kind of event because a lot of things are excused within our own community, limitations and things like that. But, you know, and then they have a place. For example, you know, if I'm going to attend something like the Battle of Hastings, then yes, damn right, I'm going to be a little bit snotty if I see people showing up wearing kind of migration or, you know, early Viking Age kind of pagan clothing. I'm like, well, what are you doing? This is a specific time and date, and we do kind of have a fairly good idea of what people would have been wearing, what kind of weapons they would have used, and that is not, you know, that isn't kosher. That's not that's very far away from what's right. But I'm going off on one, my apologies. But yeah, these kind of hypothetical, well, I know they do exist in real life, hypothetical multicultural and multi-period events actually give a lot of freedom and opportunity. You remove some of the barbs from the problem of, you know, at risk of ruffling some feathers, some people, they are a minority, but they're a very vocal minority in the Viking Age community, like white supremacists who like a lot of Viking Age history and they have their own interpretation through a very specific lens. And people of that persuasion often really have a lot to say regarding people who are not white or taking part in historical events. And while I think that I, as you can probably tell, I have very strong feelings on that, you know, and it's very, you know, very much, I think that is, you know, a lot of codswallop, you know, and it's based in nothing but kind of bigotry, and just being a big old meanie, to be honest. They can get on their bike with that, because at the end of the day, we're all just a bunch of people dressing up in a field and talking to members of the public about the past, and they can jog on with telling people that they can't attend, as far as I'm concerned, especially as something arbitrary as their skin color, especially when we're talking about a historical period and place where, while they might not have been, you know, a majority, people of different skin colors and backgrounds did exist, and, you know, people did know that they existed. But anyway,
I just want to take a moment to, just sorry to interrupt, but, you know, like, just in case people haven't gotten the hint that, you know, this channel does not endorse that European exceptionalism, or white supremacy, or medieval exceptionalism, or, you know, Christian like ascendancy, or any of that other nonsense.
Or indeed pagan ascendancy.
Oh yeah,
which is mainly a problem in my period.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Or the Iranian supremacy, which I tend to get a lot of.
yeah, or any exceptionalism of any kind. You know, I'm based on cold hard facts, and skepticism, and you know, like actual thoughts and logic and reason, and equality. Yeah, so just just a really clear message to anyone that hears this, that's our stance. That has always been our stance on this channel. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to make that clear in case that has, like, the content of the channel hasn't been clear before. I just, yeah, thanks.
It's quite all right. I'm actually very glad that you said that, because I will have to send you a link, and maybe you can, if it's relevant, if you deem it relevant, you could put it in the description. There was a blog post that's gone out quite recently because of various political events that have taken place in countries that will not be named and that have had echoes across the world in January 2021. Quite a popular blogger and
yes,
Reenactor and
yeah.
all this stuff. She made a post recently. Ingrid is her name, but I can't pronounce because I'm not going to butcher the name of her blog. But she wrote a very, very interesting article that's gone kind of, I don't know if you could say it's gone viral, but at least in my circles anyway, lots of my friends and acquaintances have been discussing it regarding exactly that, and saying that it's sometimes difficult if you are even just within your community, you are minorly a public figure or you have some kind of platform. There is a worry about actually coming out and saying, I disavow this, I am taking a stance. That is, she was discussing, I'll link it to you later, but she was discussing this very thing that she said, as many people, well, in all facets of society, but even small, the reenactment world is big and it's really small. There's tons of people who do it, but it's also a very niche hobby. And yes, she was just discussing exactly that she says it's very difficult to, especially as a business owner, especially if you're getting money from it, is to come out and actually say, yes, I disavow that. This is my stance, and I'm taking a stance. And I'm sorry to any fans of mine who don't like that, but here you go. This is not what I agree with.
Oh, I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry to anyone that has those views.
I'm glad that you're not.
Like, seriously, look at yourself. Just sort yourself out. Just don't.
Yeah.
Like,
whatever you're doing, just don't.
Just don't. It's a bad time. It's a bad time. Just don't. Yeah.
What was it? I was just going to finish off my train of thought. Sorry. Regarding... No. I was going to say I'm very, very glad that you did. I don't mind at all. Please do say it. I think more people need to. But especially when the thing that we're doing, with any kind of medieval history, it's fraught with it. So it's
a haven. It's a haven for people to hide themselves. Like there's certain things like there's certain things where people can hide themselves within the ranks and then recruit, and that's why they're so protective of it. That's why they move in those circles, because it obfuscates the truth of their behaviors and their actions. And then when they're called out, they get so defensive and act in the way that they do, and aggressive and mean and because the light of truth is shown on their actions.
Yes, there are a great many crypto fascists, at least in both, not just in reenactment. I mean, generally, I was discussing this conversation that we're having. I was discussing it ahead of time with my husband, and we were saying that at risk of making everything I'm saying sound like a kind of a moot point, really at the end of the day, it's important to remember that reenactment and the various reenactment communities that exist are just a slice of society. It's just made up of regular people, and if you get any number of, if you take a big group of people, or even a fairly small group of people, but if you get enough people in a room, you're going to eventually have some problems. You're going to have some issues. People are going to have different views on things. That might come as a shock. That might actually become problematic, because if enough people in the room have that kind of view, and it then means that other people can't engage fairly or equally in whatever it is that the people are doing in that room, then eventually, if you get enough people in the room, you're going to have that problem, and you can choose to deal with it, or you can choose to not deal with it. I would prefer that we did, which is why I'm glad we're discussing this.
Me too. Me too. And I'm really happy that both of you are here. talking about this, because it's something that we really need to address. Sorry to just swerve the conversation, because it is something important that we have to talk about, but there's something else that I did want to talk about, and if we've got time, which, I mean, we've got as much time as I say. I did have you on, obviously, to talk about the experiences, particularly of women in reenactment, and we've kind of talked about that in the whole. But is there anything that we haven't addressed?
This is probably going to make me very unpopular, but it's got to be said. You know,
the white nationalism call-out's probably already done it.
Well, you know what, they can try it, and for what it's worth, I mean, I'm currently in. I said currently as if I'm not planning on staying in it. I am in a multiracial marriage, a mixed marriage. So you know. If that's not bad enough, anyway. What was I going to say? Yes. At risk of being very unpopular, like I said earlier, obviously, reenactment is just a slice of society. It's made up of all sorts of different people of all sorts of backgrounds. However, it's my personal belief that due to some things that are unique, not unique, that they are more specific to reenactment. For example, the fact that we are portraying the past, sometimes very specific areas of the past where treatment of women was not where we would like it to be, in terms of, you know, women were not treated equally to men. They didn't have the same legal protections. They didn't have the same freedoms as we enjoy now in much of the world, certainly in the UK. When portraying periods like that, it makes a lot of sense that some of the types of people who would be attracted to portraying or recreating you know, scenes or facets of that time period, it makes sense that some of those people who are that way inclined would maybe kind of agree with women being treated that way. I'm also, outside of reenactment, I'm quite interested in vintage clothing, especially for me, 1950s and 60s clothing, Western fashion, and you know, the pan Western fashion, but you know, 1950s and 60s clothing. And I previously used to attend some kind of events and vintage fairs that were more kind of 30s and 40s, and you hear it often in those circles. I also hear it quite a lot at events, alarmingly, for Viking Age. People making kind of slightly jokey remarks, especially regarding women who are dressed nicely, saying things kind of like, kind of how women should be, or, you know, more women now. I wish more women nowadays, you know, kind of, oh, you know, I don't know, how would I put it? Yeah, I wish women, you know, how things used to be. Ooh, you know, dressed like, you know, a woman should be. Ooh, you look lovely, just like how a woman should be. I wish more women dressed that way. Or, you know, usually nowadays it's accompanied with a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and a ooh, don't call me a sexist, but you know, you cooking and wearing long skirts suits you. You know, I just think that women, you know, it's so nice. Women kind of acting like women is the phrase I was looking for. And yes, so I think that's quite common. I get that a lot as a female reenactor who portrays a woman in kit. Yes, I hear that quite a lot. Less from the reenactors, actually, and more from members of the public. People saying, oh, you know, like I said, always prefaced with some kind of either making out that they're joking or saying, oh, don't call me sexist, but, and kind of saying, oh, I just think it's nice that women are women and men are men, you know, how it used to be. And I'm thinking back to all of the times in, you know, the law codes and stuff from actually by that point it was like mid the high medieval period, actually. A lot of the law codes and things like that from Iceland, they are often kind of described as being like, oh, Viking laws and things like that, but a lot of them were written down, a century or two after the Viking Age ended. But a lot of the law codes that they still have in Iceland, some of the ones that they have from mainland Scandinavia, things like that, a lot of these law codes talking about kind of, grounds for divorce, for a woman can divorce a man if he wears low-cut tunics and things like that. And I'm thinking, yes, or talking about like kind of all sorts of funny stories from sagas and from, as I said, these historical accounts and things like that. Not to mention the material evidence that we find that often from all over history, that very much contradicts this idea of this like typical Western, what Western masculinity is and what it used to be, and that apparently it's only the past 100 years that has thoroughly destroyed that. And I'm thinking, well, it's a myth. What you're thinking of is a myth. Also, this whole idea of what a woman should be, and that apparently all the way through history up until now, women's roles was never questioned and was never, not only never questioned, but that all women, kind of went along with it because that's the way that women were and the way that men were. Usually, of course, I don't say this. I try and be polite. You got to pick your battles. Some people, it's clearly not worth with some members of the public or reenactors to have that conversation because they won't hear you. But some people are very open to it, which is nice. That's a problem. Just the fact that women are expected to be in those roles. There is a problem, at least in the Viking Age stuff. I believe that there is a problem with women portraying women and women portraying male roles if they belong to a society or a group that permits that, because some groups don't. That's, I mean, I don't really agree with that, but at the same time, I would never join a group that did that said that I couldn't do that. And so in some ways, I feel a bit kind of, I leave them, the groups that would say that women have to portray women, there's only so much time in the day. I kind of leave them to it. I'm not going to, I wouldn't be interested in joining them anyway, and they wouldn't be interested in having me for the most part because I would be too annoying. But yeah, I do think there's a problem with an artificial problem that has been kind of fueled, I think, by despite the fact that I would say that I would describe myself as a feminist, surprise surprise, and I would describe myself as being kind of politically correct and interested in representation. So in better representation, sorry. That has actually in some ways kind of fueled this, I wouldn't say that it's rivalry, because I don't think there is a rivalry there, but this kind of uneasy relationship between female reenactors who portray female roles and who portray male roles. There are a lot of I think there's a fair amount of toxicity there, that it's kind of seen that you can be one or the other. Many people, very successfully do both, and I admire them for being able to do that. Especially the women who are going into, more combat-oriented groups and things like that. I think that those can be a bit of a man's world, and it must be. I think that most of these women would be not being truthful if they didn't say that there was at least occasionally that they felt a bit uncomfortable being in that kind of, or at least, not super confident or whatever, being in that thing, because it's tough. So I have big respect for those women, but I've had some pretty toxic interactions with some of those women who only portray male roles, so that they're into it for the combat usually, them very much looking down on women who portray women, and kind of taking more domestic roles, especially the cooking or like the kind of sewing and making clothes. I've had some pretty frustrating interactions with other women, who have been in that, and that they've actually been far more sexist, if you want to use that term. They've been far more sexist and chauvinist than some of the men, most of the men are. And I think that some of that is because they are women and they kind of feel like that they can get away with it. And it's annoying, but you get that. And that leads on to my next point, that I think another issue, I'm sure that this happens in other time periods. I'm almost certain it's not like just a Viking Age thing, but just generally, there is a lack of, for some people, there is a lack of respect for jobs in camp and crafts and things like that are seen as traditionally women's roles, and that extends to men as well. That in my own group, I love them. I love them to pieces. I miss them to distraction, and my husband and I, so we've not been married that long, so I'm still, my husband and I, we were founding members of the group. We currently have a different group, a group leader who is not either of us, and we're in supporting roles of our leader. And ourselves, our leader, and the other supporting members of the kind of committee, if you like, we have put our foot down, and especially in the past year, we've recently made discussions of putting our foot down and saying everyone has to have at least, we're not going to say a craft, everyone in the group should seek to cultivate some skills, at least one skill that they can confidently kind of be doing in camp, or that they can discuss. We accept, for example, if we're on camp somewhere, if someone's a blacksmith, they might not exactly be able to, or a bead, a glass worker or a bead maker or something, they might not necessarily have the option to bring along a forge, but they can still show things that they've made. They can discuss the process with people, and we have. I'm proud to say that we have encouraged, and we've not had any pushback from that. Everyone's actually been very, especially the men in our group. We've had a very positive reaction from that we're trying to be nice about it, but we've put our foot down and we've said, everyone, we don't want to have, even if you are a warrior and you're doing this for, mostly you get a kick out of doing the combat, that's great, but you should have at least some knowledge of something else that you can talk about when you're in camp. Don't leave it to the people who are in the middle of cooking to also have to be the people who have to talk about every other thing, every other craft thing. You should, have at least something to do. Also, we don't want you just sat around. Look busy. So look busy. Have a bit more about you, because it's fun to have a different variety of stuff to do. But yes, even the men in our group who, as a result of that, have been trying to, in the past couple of years, have been trying to cultivate some new skills and some new knowledge and stuff that that they can work on. They have been, had people made really, usually actually it's other reenactors making snarky remarks about, like, kind of, oh, don't you have the women in the group to do that for you? When they're sat around kind of, mending their own tunic or something, or null binding themselves, a hat or some mittens or something. And people will make kind of, again, usually it's played off as a joke, but it's not especially funny, that they'll make out to or cooking, when some of the men in the group are, I was going to say they're helping, but I mean, they're not. We're working as a team. When they are chopping vegetables or something, they'll say, oh, well, shouldn't the women be doing that? And it's
that's
a bit
not
like,
helping,
well,
right? It's like, that's the thing that I don't understand. Sorry to interrupt, but
they'd
it's
rather,
not helping.
no, it's fine.
It's like, I'm cooking for myself. I'm not helping. It's just like
yes,
the same
they aren't
thing
helping. They are cooking. They're cooking
like,
for themselves and for everyone else.
It's like a father looking after his own baby, and it's like, oh, are you babysitting? No, I'm looking after my own child.
Yeah. Oh, aren't you lucky that you've got a fella who can look after you? Yeah. He's willing to look after the child. Yes. And honestly, I mean, from discussions that I've had with my friends in the group who are, who are male. I don't know why I really struggled on that, as if like man is a dirty word. But with some of my male friends in the group that I've discussed things with, who are maybe not so, they don't have an initial inclination towards doing certain crafts. I actually think that those comments really do, they're based in misogyny, but they have also had a negative effect on, like, the guys in the group as well, that some of them have learnt to needle bind or to do tablet weaving, and some of them are now looking into doing other, like, textile based crafts, because they're coded immediately as being female, and for fairly good reason. In the Viking Age, the vast majority of textile work was done, it was undertaken by women. So I mean, it's not entirely unfair, but I'll put it this way, that knowledge isn't gendered, is it?
No.
And it's kind of ridiculous that, imagine if we did attend an event, and this did used to happen a couple of years ago, before we had more members who were able to attend. We had a different kind of set of members, really, and less access to ready access to transport. I would sometimes attend events, and I very much felt like Wendy with the Lost Boys, that and for the longest time I was one of the only girls in the group who did have a female role and attended most of the events, and had the knowledge and the confidence to be able to at least kind of hold my own in camp, and cook and keep the fire going or whatever. And Yeah, I mean, the fellows would mostly just sit round doing absolutely nothing. And I mean, I would have to do if I did do cooking for the group at the events. I was absolutely rushed off my feet, and it was very stressful. The guys would be kind of sat around, kind of, what do you need us to help? And I'd be like, well, no, I've kind of mostly done I've done most of it now. But since I've spoken to some of my male friends, in the past year or two, since we've been pushing it more and kind of trying to encourage people, they've been a lot happier. That they've said, well, it's a lot less boring now when I'm sat in camp or when I'm like out and about. And it's way less uncomfortable when a member of the public comes up and asks us kind of what we're doing and what our camp is about, what kind of our group is about. I don't have to say, oh, well, the only interesting thing that is going on in camp is X, and Leah is doing X, and I don't know enough about X to be able to tell you about it, so you'd have to speak to her. They don't have to do that anymore. They've now learned a skill, and they're less bored, and they can kind of, hold their own a bit more. But those little remarks about, shouldn't you, oh, what you're doing sewing, shouldn't a woman be doing that you're just robbing the guy of an experience and making him feel small for absolutely no reason.
Well, I mean, what you're talking about is a story of empowerment, right? Like, which is what this channel's always been about. It's been about empowering people, through the skills of, obviously, we talk about sewing. We don't talk about like metalworking or leatherworking, because there's plenty of other channels out there that talk about that. Both Ocean and I were skilled, seamsters, I don't know, sewers, seamsters, but empowering people to like improve their kit, their costumes, and anyone can do it, and to show that anyone can do it, but it's the same thing. It's a story of empowerment, and then obviously it's challenging to people to see that things that are traditionally thought of in an encampment as female roles, which I think is something that I've been at events, and traditionally, because I love cooking, I've always loved cooking. I also love eating, and which is why I love cooking. A lot of times I've always taken up cooking. Even when I was doing my nightly impression, I would still cook for the group. But a lot of times when I wouldn't, it would fall down to one of the female members of the group, and then all the people would be like, "Oh, when we're eating." And I remember one time someone saying, "I'm not your mum." That's right, they're not your mum.
Yeah.
And I used to just yell at people like, "All right, are you busy? Cut some carrots." And then suddenly find a reason to be busy. Like, no, you're not busy cutting carrots. You're go get me water. More of an angry sergeant.
Yes. Well, sometimes you need that to be the case. We like I said, we were discussing in November. We had our group's annual group meeting, and like I was talking about, we were discussing this thing of kind of roll call everybody. What are you? You should probably pick a skill, not a craft necessarily, but a skill. And that includes things. If they want to learn scalding or storytelling or poetry or whatever, that's a skill rather than a craft. But what are you guys thinking of? And it really warmed the cockles of my heart that a couple of the guys in our group, some of them were like a bit younger and they've not been doing this for all that long, they messaged me, and I'd been talking to them saying, well, you can also be part of the cooking crew, the specific cooking crew, meaning if we decide as a group at the event that we want to have cooked food, we'll be kind of calling upon the people who are members of the cooking crew, who will be attending that event. It'll be kind of, unless you have a really good reason or something else that you have to do that weekend, it'll be on you, to be kind of helping. We'll be working as a team to cook, because we've gotten to the point now where there are enough of us attending events regularly that I cannot cook for everyone by myself. I there needs to be more than one of us doing it at any one time. And it really warmed the cockles of my heart that it was pretty much, I think there was me and one of my good friends who is a woman, and then my brother, who is he has been planning on doing it anyway, but 2 or 3 guys in the group messaged me after this group meeting and said, "Oh, I didn't realise that cooking counted as one of the crafts. I don't know much, but about food in the period, but I would really like to learn. Am I allowed?" And I was thinking, I said to them, "Well, what do you mean? You know, am I allowed?" "Yes, of course you are." And they said, "Oh, well, I don't know. I thought maybe you might prefer it if it was women." And I was thinking, actually, at this point, it's, you know, now there's going to be me and my friend that'll make 2 women, but now we've got, you know, 3 or 4 guys on the team. You know, if they go along with it, and if they do want to do it after, maybe they'll do one event and they'll go, "Oh my God, that was really stressful. I don't want to do that again." But yeah, they were very, very, you know, interested in that. And that really, it was a bit sad, the fact that they said, you know, "I thought you might prefer it was women." I thought, well, one of them said, "I thought it had to be women doing the cooking because in camp, you know, for authenticity reasons." And I was like, well, no. You know, in fact, actually, in the few images that we have in Anglo-Saxon manuscripts from the Viking Age and after as well, not to mention on the Bio Tapestry, there aren't women. It's not women who are serving or cooking in the kitchen in the few depictions that we have. It's all men, you know, and that might be because the people who were drawing, you know, the art were biased in such a way that they were mostly used to representing men, or it might be either way. If it's that, you know, then we can't prove it unless we can get a time machine. We can't prove that. But it does, you know, it doesn't seem, I'm sure that in the average household, it probably was mostly women and girls who were doing much of the food preparation. But I also happen to think that it wasn't like a rule you know, it wasn't a job that it's like, oh, we're only hiring women. I think probably everyone pitched in. My opinion obviously doesn't, my opinion is just my opinion based on not much historical fact, really.
I'm not gonna extrapolate on that, because like agrarian societies, like
they follow their own rules.
Well, yeah, the division of labor is like whoever needs to do the job does the job.
Yes.
You know, there's less gender like division of labor. So, you know, everyone's doing the job because there's a lot of work. It needs to be done
because people are going to starve. I've had this discussion with a couple of people in camp that people don't realize how much even people within cities were, you know, subsistence farming. For, you know, if that's the right term.
I mean, yeah, like now you're in my wheelhouse. And I'm not going to turn this into like but yeah, like the urban cities did absolutely have huge gardens, and like the urban elite had gardens and gardeners and farmers, and mostly they were growing things like fruits and vegetables. But even a lot of the people who owned houses had their own gardens that they supplied their own like fresh produce for, to supplement their diets. Unless you were poor and lived in like a 1-bedroom place where you couldn't have a garden. But yeah, so but there's accounts of like bishops having like these huge gardens with plum trees and nuts like almonds and pecans and you know, whatever else. Pecans doesn't sound right. But you know,
almonds and walnuts, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Oh no, almonds.
Yeah.
Continental Europe, yeah.
Yeah, you know, so that's a huge thing. And they were hiring gardeners. But you know, during the high medieval and late medieval period, women were I've got books, lots and lots of books, and I'm going to do lots of videos on it. But women were, you know, taking wages, but not for a lot of jobs, and it wasn't only until post Black Death that they were like enfranchised into the workforce. But they were doing lots of domestic tasks, unpaid. How weird. Yeah, there you go. Because the division of labor, labor just needs to happen. Yeah.
I think keeping that, it's where context is always key, isn't it? You know, in our impressions, in how we talk to the public, how we interpret the evidence that we have, both archaeological and written evidence. Context is so important. You know, I was explaining to one of my newer members not so long ago, where they'd seen on Pinterest that thing that is Pinterest, gotten to the point now where I tell people, if you're wanting to look something up, right minus Pinterest when you're looking for the find, because otherwise you will end up finding exactly what you don't need to be finding. But yeah, what I was telling one of my younger members, that they'd gone on Pinterest and they'd seen, while they were looking at Viking age clothing, they'd seen all of this beautiful work by people in the SCA, but it's completely ahistorical kind of feast clothing, absolutely covered in embroidery. And I was having to explain to them that, something that was told to me actually last year, that it was kind of a thing that had never really clicked before until I discussed it with the lady, that she was telling me, oh, well, just think about it. We don't, first of all, the evidence just isn't there. Even in really high status kind of clothing, you don't tend to see embroidery that much. Yes, it could have rotted away. But the thing is, we at the end of the day, you have to rely on what is remaining. It's not good enough to say, well, it could have rotted away, and it's like, but it's still, we don't know, it's not here. But she said, embroidery, it's very easy for us. With most people have kind of fairly sedentary jobs, especially compared to 1,000 years ago. We live a very sedentary lifestyle. We have the 8-hour workday, and then at the end of the day, we have televisions where the average person will spend a lot of time, or you'll either be on the computer, or you can sit and you can put on Netflix, and you can binge watch, a series of TV, of whatever on TV, and you can sit with your well-lit home, regardless of what time of year it is. Hell, you can be awake at 3 a.m, and if you want, you can have every light on in the house. You can sit there in your well-lit, warmed house, probably with a full belly, watching TV, and you can stitch to your heart's content with the very cheap, very readily available yarns that you can go to the shop and buy, in all sorts of bright, crazy colours. And she said, well, that's why, reenactors, it looks cool and it looks really pretty. Reenactors have the time and the energy to be able to sit and, embroider an entire, apron dress just covered with the stuff, heavy with the stuff. And she said, but you haven't had to dye or spin the yarn, you haven't had to process the yarn, you might have the washing machine on while you're doing that, while you're doing your work, and you won't even give it a second thought, the fact that how much labor you have saved just by having even one appliance. If you had to sit in even a very nicely insulated longhouse, even during the daytime, it's dark and smoky in there and kind of, not ideal for our modern eyes. If you had to sit there squinting, embroidering something, meanwhile, you've got to feed the animals, you've got to do everything manually, and everything takes a really long time, comparatively to now. Do you really, if you do finish work at a certain time and you haven't just immediately passed out and gone to sleep, you're probably not going to want to sit and take the time to embroider something, not to mention how expensive it would be and how, precious your time was.
I mean, that's why things like Opus Anglicanum was a commodity.
Oh, yeah. And even then it was done, it was done by nuns.
Done by
very
nuns.
high status women.
Yeah, exactly, because they had free time. And that's why, you don't start seeing high quality textiles until the industrialization of the loom in the 13th and 14th century in Flanders, and
isn't it around that point that weaving became a men's profession?
Yeah.
Or a mixed profession anyway.
Oh, mixed. Yeah, I mean, the 14th, once again, post Black Death, but it becomes an industrialized process in the 14th century. You start seeing guild houses. It's all about the guilds, right? But guild houses, they build halls as opposed to being individual guild members having them in their houses, or homespun or home weavers. They start building these massive halls, and it's becoming proto-industrialized. And they'd have 100 looms and 100 weavers, and they would just build pumping out 1,000 yards a day.
Yes.
The amount of textiles that started rolling out is in industrial levels. It's absolutely mind-boggling, that the amount of textiles that and we're talking 3 stories of looms. Yeah.
But again, that just goes to show, doesn't it, what can be achieved when people work together and when we aren't limiting ourselves by something really arbitrary, like, oh, that's woman's work or that's man's work, men's work only.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so what we'll do, I think we're kind of petering out here now, because now we're starting to nerd out about history, and that wasn't the intention of this story.
Sorry, I got you onto it.
Yeah, every time. So, any final thoughts?
Nadeem, would you like to go?
Honestly, I've just been really enjoying listening to you guys talk.
Oh,
that's good. It's engaging.
I mean, the order of the day, I suppose, is inclusion, and specifically because of my background, like how we can better, as a community, take steps to include women and encourage women, both reenactors and hopeful reenactors. I think sounding like a stuck record is communication just amongst everyone, talking about it, having the discussions, being okay to be uncomfortable. And I realize that sounds a little bit hypocritical, because I was saying about how, that we should kind of tell people to, to amend what they're saying if it's making others uncomfortable. But I think, people on both sides, be prepared to be uncomfortable, specifically when it comes to having discussions about why it's uncomfortable, and be willing to listen to each other. And then respect the roles that all of us play. We, the three of us here have already discussed about how we respect the fact that as reenactors, we have our origins, most of us, in military reenactment or groups that portray a military kind of background or impression. And still to this day, we're able to attend the events that we do most of the time because the public is willing to pay and come and see the battle. So we have to respect the fact that the people, combat is good fun if that's your bag of tricks. It's not mine, but it is fun. It's good fun. It's good fun to watch. It's good fun to partake in. It is fun to improve in, and we should be appreciative of the fact that the roles of the combatants is an important one in terms of getting butts in seats or getting feet in wellies, as it is in the UK. To put people willing to walk out into that soggy field and come watch you all. But also that goes both ways. That I'm not going to say about it being that men need to respect women and women need to respect men, although we should, and everything in between. We should respect each other for those reasons. But like I was talking about with my friends and the people in my group, people who do military, who take on military roles, should be careful to try and show some more respect, and show some more respect to people who are in the supporting, more domestic roles, and vice versa. And we need to accept that all of us are going to enjoy different things, but that as long as there is some mutual respect there, that is a good start. And mutual respect for the roles that all of us play in being able to have this ecosystem, what's the word, exist and keep on existing.
I would agree with that. I think that just wrapping this all up, that way forward to create some dialogue, instead of people pointing fingers and saying you're bad or I disagree with you, that if people could have some dialogue and try to, instead of saying, no, I don't want you in my community, things should stay the way they, the traditionalists, let's call them the traditionalists. I wish I thought of that earlier, like a half an hour earlier. People who want things to stay the same, the traditionalists, it's not going to stay the same. Things are always going to change. Things are always going to change. Being open and working with people who want to grow the community, want it to be better. I mean, people are always saying like, oh, reenactment's dying out, we're not getting the numbers. Think about that. Why? Just think about why. society is changing. It's evolving. Everything's changing. People still want to reenact. Let's work together. Let's just work together. There's still room for swinging swords. There's still room to like investigate and do military history. But let's work together to have a strong community where everyone can play. But that does not mean we get to include the people who are harmful.
Yes.
Have a hard look at those people. Now, do I believe in cancelling people? No. No. And that is an unpopular opinion. That is an unpopular opinion amongst people who want to cancel people. That is an unpopular opinion amongst everyone. No. However, there has to be some systemic changes within the community. There has to be some systemic changes with people's behavior. If you want to be included, you have to play nice. You can't do things that are harmful to people. So if you can't play, you have to take your ball and sit out. It's basically it.
I agree. I think the way that it can be summed up is, the old adage. The adage of your rights end where they start to infringe on someone else's. And I would say at that point, if someone is hurting others, and if someone is truly hurting others, then at that point it's like, well, we don't have to, and we're not going to put up with this behavior anymore.
Yeah. You
have a right to have your opinion, but and to believe the things that you do, espouse the values that you do, but you do not have the right to. So you do not have the entitlement to be able to attend this event or to be within this group, because the view that you have, which you're entitled to, is that other people in the group can't be part of it or should not be able to attend because of something that they can't help. So or that their involvement should be limited, and it's all based on something arbitrary that they can't help, like their skin color or their gender identity or their
sexual orientation.
The sexual orientation. That's the word I was looking for. I was actually going to say sexual occupation, and I was like, that's not what I meant.
Or their ability, and
yes.
Just on that, I would like, we didn't get to cover that here. Obviously, as a person with a disability, I'd like to have an episode talking about that. If anyone in the community is listening to that, this episode, and would like to contact me, reach out and talk about their experiences as somebody as a person with a disability, and would like to have a conversation with me and talking about as a person with a disability and the challenges in reenactment, please reach out. Or whether or not there's a topic you think that we should cover, or hey, look, because I don't believe in being myopic, and I don't want to both sides this, but if someone does have a traditional view and they would like to have a chat with me, I'd be more than happy to have a chat with you. Contact me. You can IM me. You can email me. I'd love to have a chat. That said, thank you so much, Nadeem and Leah, for coming.
And thank you for listening to this episode. And please like, comment, and subscribe. You'll really help us out. And remember, stay safe, have fun, and keep reenacting.